Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another Roll20 review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the marketplace section of online role-playing website Roll20.net. This video, I'll be reviewing Eberron, Rising from the Last War, designed by Wizards of the Coast and adapted by Roll20. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shout out to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, and Rodney. And gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy and Yuma, Marcos de Vicente Gilberto, Sean A.K., Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, and Sam. Thank you all very much for your support. So, I feel like I say this a lot, but I am not wholly familiar with the Eberron campaign setting. I believe it was introduced in somewhere in the early 4th edition, late 3.5 edition era, which is kind of like the dark ages of Dungeons and Dragons. I feel like at this point, you know, the 4th edition was kind of a low point for D&D. So I don't know if Eberron just gets a bad rap or if just not enough people actually know about it, and to Wizards' detriment, they have pretty much also forgotten about Eberron, as well as pretty much all their other campaign settings. D&D used to not just be about the Forgotten Realms. It was the most popular setting, I think, for a while, and obviously continues to be the most popular to where 5th edition is basically the Forgotten Realms. That's pretty much what D&D is synonymous with. But that's not the case. You can play D&D in Dragonlance and in Greyhawk and all these other universes, Eberron being one of them. I think Eberron is the most recent new one, unless you count something like Ravnica that might actually become later. Anyway, Eberron Rising from the Last War is the official conversion of all the Eberron material from 3.5 and 4th edition into 5th edition. And we finally get the Artificer as a class, which first appeared in an Unearthed Arcana for 5th edition, as an official class for the Eberron book, which means it's officially added to 5th edition, assuming your DM lets you play with the book +1 material. The Roll20 module, it's a bit of a tougher sell. You know, I really like the Roll20 modules when it comes to their adventures, because obviously you've got all the maps in place, you've got all the tokens there, the dynamic lighting. It's so much easier and convenient, assuming you like the map style that Wizards has been using, and I could make a whole video rant about that, at least in the last couple years. But I'm generally pretty positive on the adventures. On the flip side, the actual source books for Roll20 purposes are a lot less useful because it's mainly just information. You don't necessarily need information built into your Roll20 client. It's nice to have, certainly, especially when it comes to things like being able to use those races and classes with the character monster, which is a really nice tool that Roll20 has that lets you essentially build your character using a series of step-by-step menus rather than just kind of inputting everything manually. Again, really nice to have, but not necessary. Same thing with this, and it does come with an adventure, which is how the Ravnica sourcebook was built also. So, in other words, look at this very similar to the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. They're very, very similarly designed in that it is, 80 to 90% source book of information for mainly DMs, and then obviously some new stuff that players can do. And then that last 10-20% is a level 1 introductory adventure, which is exactly how Ravnica did it. In fact, I think the actual universes between Eberron and Ravnica are pretty damn similar, to where I'd be suspect if Ravnica wasn't partially built from Eberron. I actually don't know which one came first. I'm sure someone will let me know in the comments. Also, let me know in the comments what your experiences are with Eberron. I'm very curious about that, because I think it's definitely pretty cool sounding. I love the idea that it's even more high magic than D&D, which I would already consider like Forgotten Realms D&D to be very high magic compared to, like obviously Game of Thrones would be an example of a low magic world, but even like a Lord of the Rings, I consider to be kind of low magic in general, like just in terms of literal magic stuff going on. It's a big deal when somebody casts a spell or has a magic item in that universe, whereas in Forgotten Realms, that shit happens all the time. And in Eberron, it's even more all the time that magic is going nuts. And like their entire technology, their entire world is based on powering from magic. So that's a really, really interesting hook. All right, so what do you get with the Eberron Rising from the Last War, $49.95 bundle on Roll20. You get the introductory level 1 adventure called Forgotten Relics as a module add-on, which means you can add it to any campaign that you create. The other add-ons you get, which is pretty standard now, is the Eberron Compendium, which just means you can go to your compendium and search for any information that is included in this adventure, no matter what campaign you're in, and you got that information, as well as a character art pack as individual module add-ons. We also get 14 5-foot battle maps, all with dynamic lighting if you are a subscriber. There are a lot of maps included here, which is pretty impressive, considering the adventure only really uses 2 maps. Really just one map. The one is just kind of a single train car, but I do like the train car map that they've got here. But I was impressed with the number of maps. I'm not super big on the Dice and Logos map quality that Wizards continues to use for the last 2 years or so. They seem to have just completely switched gears away from the early map designs and have now gone with this one, and I do not like it at all. I will say that. So that is a big bummer. I'm not a fan of these map designs, but I like the number that we've gotten and the ideas behind them, which is to show off unique areas and situations as you would find themselves in Eberron. For example, a Warforged like factory. Pretty cool, and arcane workshops and all these things. We also get 2 non-gridded world map and region maps. These are my favorite maps because they are full color and awesome looking. I love that we actually get a world map too. You know, so much of the Forgotten Realms is literally just a continent technically, and even then it's like a slice of a continent if you look at just like the Sword Coast. This is the whole dang map, baby. The world is round. And then we get a regional map, which is I think most of the RPGs take place in Corvair, which is what this continent map is. And this is a really gorgeous, awesome map. I friggin' love this design. This is beautiful. I wish all the maps were this good, but alas, it's just this world map here. We also get more information on, so you get information based on all of these areas, but mostly on Sharn, located down here. We also get 1 blank random battle map. It's whatever, as well as the alphabetized token page, which has become fairly standard now in all the Roll20 modules. You can see it here. Not a whole lot of monsters actually added here, which I'll get to that in a second, but there's the token page, which is just useful for looking at the token size difference, I guess, because you can easily drag and drop whatever tokens you need, and it's automatically attached to all the stat blocks. We also get a new class, which is the Artificer, which includes 2 new subclasses. 8 new races and sub-races, not including dragon marks, so those will be like the Warforged, the Changelings, the Shifters. I believe all of these were originally introduced in Eberron, so I don't think there's anything new here, but again, I'm not super familiar with Eberron in its original incarnation. As well as 12 dragon marks, which dragon marks are things that they're actually tied to certain races. Certain races can only have certain dragon marks, and they either modify or replace your subclass, so they operate as their own subclass. These magical tattoos that are attached to bloodlines that give you additional powers. So that's pretty cool, and it adds an additional layer to building a character because you can be an elf, but with the whatever finding dragon mark or something, and that's different than being a standard like high elf or dark elf, for example. We get the journal organized into 6 chapters of Eberron information and adventure building. Again, that is the majority of what the source book is. We also get over 50 monster stat sheets with matching tokens and handouts, 10 unique and named NPC character sheets with tokens and handouts, over 100 player art handouts, which is not including the monster art handout. So all of the monster tokens, if we pull this up, has their own handout like this that you can show your players without showing them the stat block. I'm not even including these. There's 100 other handouts of just gorgeous artwork. This might be one of the most art-heavy Wizards books I've ever seen. Or maybe it's just a symptom of the fact that Roll20 has organized them so well to where it's under their own subheading right here at the bottom, where you can see all of them. I'm scrolling through them right now. That's all handout material of different artwork, and it might be a map, it might be a scene of something, it might be a dragon mark or a crest house. All of those things are player art handouts. I was really, really impressed with that. We also get over 20 magic item handouts. Sadly, almost none of them have pictures. Over 100 rollable macro tables, which are a lot of your, you're building your villain, roll a d6 to see their villain is, then roll another d6 to see what their motivation is, roll another d6 to see what where their lair is. If you're the kind of DM that likes or that needs to build things on the fly, then you can use all of these different rollable tables. Essentially, anywhere that there is a table built, like here in the text, you will see it here as a rollable table, which means you can click this roll button, and it will automatically roll the table's results in the chat window. There's a way to modify the macros so that you can create your own DM-only table so that your players don't see it, but right now it's built like this, and that is a very handy feature to have if you buy the module. And of course, we get the supplemental rules from the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide here at the bottom. So that's what's included, and it's a difficult thing to review because it's just a lot of information, and it's the same information that is included in the actual physical book. I do love the way that Roll20 has organized these things. It just makes it really easy if they're all their own subheading. So for example, under Dragon Marks, they might have even gone a little bit too nuts here. You can see there's individual subheadings for the mark, as well as, so for the mark's picture and crest and information, as well as how that mark actually creates a different sub-race. So every single one of those is placed here just in this Dragon Mark subheading under Chapter 1 of Character Creation. So that's the kind of depth and detail that goes into it. It's very easy to find what I'm looking for. I can see at a glance what each chapter is about. There's the Artificer there, still under Chapter 1. Group Patrons, which is a really cool part of Eberron, where I love that your group, it's almost more like Shadowrun, which is my other tabletop RPG experience, that your character is actually like working for someone. They're agents of this particular organization. Instead of just freelance murder hobo adventurers, that is so often the background story of a Forgotten Realms adventure where you just get caught up in something, your characters are thrown together and away you go. Like this time you're actually working for specific organizations. You can get the politics of it and the war and the underhanded and the scheming and all that. I think that's a good setup. Now, I mean, there's nothing stopping you from doing that in the Forgotten Realms for sure, but I just love that Eberron actually has clear-cut rules about group patrons and working for different organizations and how that operates, so that's really cool. Chapter 2, the Corvair Gazetteer. I forgot what other... was it Descent into Avernus that did a Gazetteer also? Where they basically had a section that was all just information. It was background, it was history, it was lore, and it's done by region, which is very, very helpful. So every single region is broken down in terms of what's going on there, what's interesting about there, who are the main players. Again, very nicely worded to where it's not just a long history textbook. It really does break it down between, bullet points of here's the information you need to know, and then here's some interesting highlights and tidbits. And that's even further expanded on when we get to Chapter 4. And so Chapter 3, not to jump ahead too far, is taking everything in Corvair and just doing one chapter on the big city of Eberron, which is Sharn, the City of Towers. It's a really neat kind of cyberpunk-esque city that's all about elevation. There's sky rails going between these skyscrapers. All of that is very Unforgotten Realms-like. So if you're doing Eberron, it's a cool idea to set the adventure in and around Sharn because that's such a unique feature of Eberron, and that separates it from I was going to say normal, but that's because 5e has conditioned me to think that Forgotten Realms is normal when that's not necessarily the case, but separates it from other not quite as high magic campaign settings. So there's a whole chapter just on Sharn about how crime works, about the different regions and the factions and all that. Chapter 4 is my favorite chapter because that is about building adventures in Eberron. And this is, as a DM, the most useful chapter. I mean, yes, it's good to have all that background information about different areas, but what I want to know is, why do I care? Why do my players care? And what kind of things could they be interested in to work towards? So this includes building entire campaigns around different ideas, about different regions, about different events that are going on, different cults, the dragons, the war that's just ended, and everybody's picking up the pieces from that. There's a whole area that was essentially, this war ended because a weapon of mass destruction was set off, destroying one whole country, and nobody really knows why or what happened. And there's all kinds of storytelling that can be done out of that, which is the Mournlands here. So there's just a lot of really great content in here that specifically gives me the reason of why I should care about certain areas and what can we do that can build adventures upon those. There's a whole chapter on what kind of themes you can use, how to make your villains come back and forth, and how to properly use villains. There's a lot of good DM advice in general, which I think is really fun to have. But I think Chapter 4 is a real treat in terms of really selling Eberron as a fun place of adventure rather than just throwing a whole bunch of history and lore and NPCs at me. But like, what are the actual highlights and cool events and situations happening in all these different areas? So that's really cool. All right, so we can talk about the Forgotten Relics adventure, which is included in this chapter. This is an introductory level 1 adventure. Basically, your players are hired to... I could come up with a different map to show, but, well, the continent map is really the only other good one here. Are hired by the City Watch to check up on an informant, Warforged. And the players can do that, and it begins at a bar, as all good stories do. And there's an explosion that goes off. The Warforged runs for her life. The players have to chase her down. So there's a cool chase sequence in alleyways to fight off some bandits. And they learn that the Warforged has become entangled in a criminal organization that has been hiring Warforged to dig up some ancient artifacts in Sharn. And this criminal organization happened to also kidnap a noble's son in order to kind of keep his mouth shut and use his resources. So the players end up following this kind of entangled web, going down into the pit, rescuing the son, and eventually tracking down the criminal organization onto a train station, hopping onto the... And first there's a sky chase, which is really cool because there's sky coaches and there's gnolls flying on discs, flying at the players. They got to repel those. They land at this huge train station area. They have to go all the way down into apartments and everything. And of course, the main baddie leaps onto a train. The players have to follow, or doesn't leap. The players have to leap onto the train to follow them as they're catching the lightning rail train to Rote here. And then finally a confrontation on the train. So there's a lot going on. It's really fun. It's very linear, obviously. It's pretty simplistic, but it has a lot of really fun action story beats. I mean, it is basically built like a thriller action movie, which is great. I absolutely would do that for writing the basis of any adventure and just letting the players kind of go from there. But I think that's a great framework, and it touches on a lot of really good, fun qualities about Eberron. Like at one point there's a changeling who appears as the quest-giving NPC, offering to give the players a ride to where the enemies are, and it's up to the players to try to suss out, like, oh, wait a minute, you're not the person we talked to, or they can be led right into the trap, and of course the changeling can reveal themselves and all that. So there's a lot of really good stuff going on. I mean, the lightning rail, the train station, you don't usually find yourself at a train station in the Forgotten Realms. You don't usually find yourself zipping through the air with gnolls coming at you on their own little hoverboards and all that. So I think there's a lot of really fun elements to that, and Sharn is obviously the perfect place to stage an adventure for something like that. It is odd that we didn't get any pre-generated characters, because usually that's the case, and that was something that was really cool in Ravnica as well that I really liked seeing, was the pre-gen characters, and they're oddly not included here. But for what it's worth, I did like that adventure. The only weird thing about the adventure, you see all these battle maps and you think, all right, we're going to get some battle maps here. Throughout the first 2/3 of the adventure, there are no battle maps whatsoever, which is odd because at least one of the locations has a pretty obvious map where you go down into the dig site and you fight some goblins and have to rescue the noble's son. It's like just a one-room area, basically, but we got no map for that. The first map you get out of that kind of montage description I gave is the train station, which is a very cool map. So obviously preface this by the fact that I do not like Dyson logo style maps at all. It's just not my style. I prefer full color detail maps, especially if I'm going to purchase, drop $50 on a map from Roll20, where the purpose is to use the battle maps in front of us. If you're just using Theater of the Mind, who gives a shit about the maps? That's totally fine. But for those of us that play on Roll20, we're looking for maps, and maps is always going to be a big factor. And I just don't think... I've never enjoyed looking at this style. I would not enjoy playing on this style. What I do like about the design of this map, though, is that we get the 2D side view here, because there's a very unique elevation where that can create complications, because you can't really do, it's hard to describe that kind of elevation difference. You can either show your players this, or at least this lets the DM know and gives you the ability to instantly look back and forth. Because again, their dynamic lighting is placed here, so your players can actually see this. They see the blue is the hard point. It gives the DM the chance to immediately look over and glance back and forth and be able to see it. I haven't seen a whole lot of battle maps that actually do that, where they put the side view right next to it. Or a lot of times Roll20 will put that on a separate page that DMs then have to reference back and forth. So I do like I don't like the art style, but I do like the map design of this unique train station that players have to basically land on and then go down and have a few encounters along the way before finally hopping on the actual train platform here, which is a whole map for that, which is cool. And again, I just wish this was a better art style, because I think that's a really neat idea for a map. The fact that this train comes through and you have to hop on and then confront the final boss of the adventure, which this is probably the coolest part of the map. I mean, I can go through some of these maps if you want. None of them have tokens in place because they're kind of, you can use them for whatever you want. They do have dynamic lighting in place, however, so all of that is here. But since none of these are actually built for adventures, there's no tokens here, but they're here. All of the words you see are on the GM layer, so they're not visible by the players. There's a little bit of detail here, which is nice, but I just wish there was better, color and everything else. But I don't want to rant too much about the art style. I've done that several times now. If you've seen my previous videos, starting with Dragon Heist, it's been a very huge disappointment the way Roll20's direction has gone with when it comes to maps. Thankfully, there are some people online that have been able to replace them with very, very lovely maps. So I suggest finding those folks if you're looking for different map styles. This is the really cool train map system that Roll20 provides, which is, so this is a train map. This one does have tokens because it is part of the adventure, technically, that it ends where you find the final boss on the train, assuming you made it onto the train. And it's a modular design. First of all, the dynamic lighting is here, as you can see. And if you go to this one right here, you can build your own train map. So you can see all the cars are listed here, front to back. If you wanted to literally build kind of an overarching train map, you wanted to have your characters basically have encounters along the way and jump the tracks and all that kind of stuff, you can do that. And they're all individually placed on the map layer. So you can take these and move them around and make your own train, which is really cool. Now, the caveat here is that dynamic lighting is in place, but dynamic lighting is not tied to the map layer. It's on its own layer, which means if I were to move this and you can switch over to the dynamic lighting, that doesn't actually change. The dynamic lighting is still there where the old map was. So you would have to take that and either copy, paste, move it along, or do something. Just be aware that's not necessarily Roll20's fault. It's just the way their system is built is that the map is on a different layer than the dynamic lighting. So if you move one, you have to move the other, which is why you always want to put your map down first, make sure everything is 100% squaresies before you put the dynamic lighting layer on top of it. Because you make any kind of minor adjustment, it just screws all of that up. But it's a really neat idea here to be able to make your own little train map. And you bet your ass, if I'm making an adventure in Eberron, there's definitely going to be a train, because that's just awesome. Like, I love the more urban-focused adventures and designed that Eberron can bring to the table. So I think that is a lot of fun. And then Chapter 5, treasure, a little disappointing. There's some cool treasures there, but this is not the Dungeon Master's Guidebook. It doesn't have a ton of treasure. And the most disappointing part, there's only 2 pictures. So all of the art, I mean, and there's such good art in general, but for some reason, none of it got left for the magic items, which is a bit of a bummer. Chapter 6, which is all the NPC stat blocks, beasts, friends, and foes. Again, not a whole lot of monsters here, but it is kind of, it's an all-in-one source book. So it's got character stuff for player options. It's got the monsters. It's got the introductory adventure. It's got a little bit of everything. So you don't have a lot of any one particular thing. Although in this case, I do think you have a lot of art, which is really, really cool to see. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for Eberron Rising from the Last War. Pro, it includes all the history, lore, and geographical details of Eberron, which it should. This is a source book designed to acquaint you with Eberron so that you can go from, potentially not knowing anything about Eberron to knowing everything you need to know about Eberron, including history and past events and highlighted areas. Pro, exotic races and dragon marks that expand character creation. There is a lot of options for new character stuff. A lot of bestial options, bugbears, changelings, different kinds of goblins. Kalishtar are like people that have like ancient ghost spirits inhabiting them that give them different telepathic powers. Shifters, which are like kind of soft lycanthropes in a way. And of course, Warforged, the famous arcane robots, basically, that everybody loves from Eberron. It's probably the most memorable part of Eberron, I think. But the dragon marks also add a ton of character options to any kind of player character for Eberron, which is really cool to see. Chapter 4, my favorite chapter as a pro. Highlight specific NPCs, events, and locations that would make ideal hotspots of adventure. I think that's just a great chapter full of really great information that's particularly useful for somebody that maybe even is like, okay, why do I care about all this lore? let me just get into the good stuff. I want to know about the fun adventures we can have. Pro, over 100 art handouts for players, helpfully organized into their own section. So much art, and I've not seen Roll20 do this before, where all of the art is located at the end. So maybe there is usually this amount of art, and I just haven't been paying attention, but seeing it all included in one section at the very end makes me go, oh, holy crap, there's a lot of artwork here in the source book, which is great because I think that's a huge source of inspiration for DMs, and it offers a huge fun player aid if that stuff comes up in adventures that you can show them these, and maybe you'll get inspired to do adventures just based on this artwork. So really fantastic art. As much as I don't like the map art, I do love the actual interior art that is used. Pro, the modular train battle map. I think that's a really cool idea, really fun, and I just like the idea of magic trains. And Pro, the Forgotten Relics is a fun level 1 adventure that emphasizes many of Eberron's unique features. I think it's a very solid level 1 introductory adventure. Cons, we don't have any pre-generated characters, which just feels like a big, odd question mark because so many other of these adventures, and I believe Ravnica as well, included pre-generated characters in order to start the adventure with. So it just feels like a very glaring omission here. Cons, only 2 of the 20+ magic item handouts include a picture. Also just kind of weird because the art is so good, it just didn't translate to the magic items for some reason. And con, the map art style. I just do not like that Dyson Logos art style. That is always going to be a con for me as long as it is being used. And unfortunately, it continues to be used here. All right, my verdict. With a wealth of information, art, new player options, and maps, Eberron Rising from the Last War features everything you need to conduct your Eberron adventures. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.